Hello, everyone. This is Yifeng from Classic Science Fiction Literature Podcast. And with me are my co-hosts Joseph and Robin. Greetings.
Hello.
Howdy.
Hello, hello. And today we're going to be talking about, I guess, a short story, novella. I don't even know what this,
Novella. Yeah, I
however you
think
call it. It's a story about the mission to the Heart Stars by James Blish. Is it
hmm
Blish?
Hmm.
And I believe it's 1956, right? Is that when it was published? Been many.
60, I think you flipped it. I think it's 65.
65. It's been it went through multiple iterations and
Okay.
Yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because
And
he's one of those authors that revises and revises endlessly. But so that's what we're going to be talking about today. But kind of the structure of our podcast is we'll read a science fiction story from the classic realm or golden age. And we talk about it. That's kind of what we're about. And that's what we're going to focus on this month. But before we get there, I just want to kind of check in and see what we've read recently. Just pick one work that you kind of enjoy, not for work, right, Robin? And then just see what you think of it, and then we'll get to kind of a little overview of the author we're getting into, and we'll just dive into the short story and conclude. That's pretty much it we're going to do today. So why don't we start with Joseph? What have you been reading recently? Just pick one.
Pick one. Um, Once Were Warriors, which is a New Zealand story about the race relations between the Maoris and the whites. Fascinating, fascinating read. Highly suggested.
It's
Challenge.
nonfiction.
Oh no, no. Well, it's fictionalized, or I guess
Oh,
they would
okay.
call it creative nonfiction. Um, it's a challenging read, only because it talks very plainly and openly uh, about the differences in race and class structure because of one's race. And to me, it's a real demonstration that the troubling race relations we have in the U.S. are not truly just specific. It happens everywhere, unfortunately. But it's told with empathy and pathos, and I really strongly recommend it.
What was the title again? Repeat the
Once Were Warriors.
Once Were Warriors.
Hmm.
And who was it by?
A New Zealand author
Okay.
whose name I forget.
That's okay. I'm sure we can Google it.
Yes.
Um, but so, as a little bit of side note, I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole. I'm from Taiwan originally. I was born there and raised there, and ethnically speaking, my bloodline is actually like an Aborigine Taiwanese,
Hmm.
which basically is a Polynesian blood. Now, Polynesian are basically island hoppers in the Pacific Islands, and in terms of ethnic and DNA structure, and the scientists have peeled this back already, done extracted and compared thousands if not millions at this point studies on this, and kind of the people that hop around the islands is basically not all the same exact, but there's a relationship between
Hmm.
the people of like the American Samoan, Hawaiians,
Hmm.
maybe even stretching as far as the Native American Indians, partially, depending on, thousands of years ago they crossed the Alaskan Strait
Yep.
and into, the Americas. But originally the Polynesian islanders, they are basically like the New Zealand Maori, Australian Aborigine, like all these people are of similar tribes. They come from
Hmm.
a long time ago, Tahiti and so on. And one of the islands that they landed on was Taiwan. And so my mom actually speaks the original dialect of that language.
Wow.
And there's actually a cultural exchange currently in modern day to try to reclaim some of that, because a lot of, like the book you're reading, a lot of that culture is because of colonization from anywhere, not just
hmm
one single country, between the Brits and the
The
Spaniards, or
French.
whoever,
Oh, yeah.
whoever, right? Whoever is landing ship somewhere is gonna say, "Hey, this is ours." And it's no different. And Taiwan was hundreds, 400 or 500 years was the Dutch. They proclaimed and they actually
hmm
labeled it as called Formosa. That's one of the labels and the names of the country where it came from. And a long story short is that there's an institute now where they're trying to reclaim that tie between multiple countries, And it's interesting because Taiwan has had representative Aborigine to talk with the Maoris of New Zealanders, and there are actually many same phrases of the languages that are exactly the same.
Wow.
Like it's a really strange and weird link. So
Yeah.
And so just more of FYI, I guess,
No,
whoever interested.
yeah, but it fits in. I don't want to jump ahead, but I think it fits in with our reading, like
Yeah.
Oh,
today,
absolutely.
too.
Yes.
So I think that's that. Thanks for sharing that too. Like I find that fascinating. I remember being, I don't know, maybe fifth grade or not fourth, but probably fifth or sixth when they started teaching about the land bridge that existed,
Yeah.
and how our Native Americans also, like as you said, were basically from Asia is the idea. And I haven't been keeping up on it that much, but I'm assuming that with genetics, the way that we're able to test now, that you can do it for fun if you want to call it that we're finding out whether that's true or not. But I'm not sure. That is so cool. That is a really neat thing to share. Now,
And those kind of racial tensions and the conflicts, like you're saying, it really exists. Whether it's apartheid, Africa, and or that the story you taught, or Australia, it just exists everywhere. Even in like the Far East, like even in the country that I come from in Taiwan, there's a conflict between people who came over from China, who are ethnically more Han Chinese, their bloodline, and they are. When they first came over, there was conflict. There was actually a Holocaust massacre called 228, or it's February 28th, where they massacred hundreds of thousands of people who were from the original islands, like a lot of colonization stories. Not uncommon, that part, but it's and people try to hide the past, right? Like many histories,
Right.
That's the whole thing about atrocities. So long story short, what I'm trying to say is that sort of theme actually ties in with a lot of different places in the world, that history,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Like you were saying. But thanks for sharing that little we're getting down the rabbit hole here.
it's a
Robin,
rabbit hole.
what you read anything interesting just for fun? I know for work you do a lot, but
it's like it's like hit the hands. I didn't this time. I feel
No
like
worries.
I was glad to be able to read Blish, and I was so thankful that we get together.
this is
because
the fun part.
Yeah,
what we're
and
reading,
because
yeah.
I wouldn't have read that. I would not have even read that for fun, except for getting together. So thank you very much, for that. And
So we're helping you relax. That's our job here, right?
yeah, that's one way of looking at it, I guess. But it's good to be busy. It's just feast or famine kind of thing. When you're a freelance editor, that's typical. You either you're the person doing the work, the majority of it. So, it's all on your shoulders, and it kind of compacts together. But I'm so bad, guys, that I was thinking, I'll just mention my TBR list. Do you know what TBR lists are? It's to be read.
Yeah.
To be read.
It's like shorthand in the publishing literary world. I don't even have a TBR list. I just have books that are gathering dust on them, and things that I looked at to get like a few, maybe even half a year ago. It's bad. But that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
I personally am crushed by that news, but okay.
I'm just laughing nervously. Here we go.
I haven't read anything massive. I would say that if the listeners recall, a while ago I was I was reading through a literary sort of like Intro to Literature 101. It's a typical college, and I think I finished that, which is nice. But part of my wife hates me using this called OCD, because I don't have OCD. But for the lack of a better term, my sort of I like to complete different things and different lists, and so like with that Intro to Literature, it gave me this basically it branches out like a tree branch, getting into everywhere. That's the whole point of it. It's a survey, and it gives you so many options. I was like, I have all these things I gotta get to, and so I kind of limit myself. I don't want to get too much into everything, but I did have a chance to kind of branch into some of the things that were interesting, I guess. And so, for example, I read Kate Chopin. I may or may not mention that last time, and like the music composer Chopin, but she's the author of the. I actually totally just blanked on the name of the title now, but she's had one famous work, but before that, she's very local to sort of the New Orleans region. Very now we call it Americana, but like she was raised up sort of with that local Creole language, sort of because her mother's kind of like that. Anyway, it's a great like piece of literature, and I just read. I ended up getting a volume out of the complete works of the poems, the shorts, and that's kind of the completest kind of I am about things and everything that she's ever written. And it's just an amazing piece of work, and also her entire body of work is amazing. So highly recommend that. And the other is just the classic Shakespeare stuff. It pointed to like I think Hamlet, and what I wanted to do was part of it is like 2-for-1 deal. One of my things the listeners remember is that one of my goals is to actually, you know, that TBR. I have the same thing. It's my bookshelf. Whatever I've acquired in the past, that the whole thing is my TBR, and I haven't touched it. Like it literally is gathering dust for decades, I think. And in the last 2 or 3 years, and now I'm getting through it. I'm about halfway through, which is nice. It's not huge. It's not a huge amount of books, and part of it is like there's that thing, but also connects with my collection of Shakespeare plays that I a lot of them I have read or like, you know, participated in, but it's like a lot of them I just either haven't reread or forgotten and stuff like that. And so like I did Hamlet and Midsummer's Night Dream, and both are amazing. And one of the things I want to do with his plays is actually to also watch the works inspired by it, because, you know, plays are meant to be watched. And so I watched the it's actually 3-for-1, because I have also a Blu-ray of this Hamlet by Kenneth Branagh, the movie in the early 90s, right?
Yeah.
I'm also trying to, if you look in the back, that's a collection of 1,000+ Blu-rays in the back. There's multiple things going on, and trying to work down these lists so it's not just piling up here, gathering dust. And so, yeah, I watched that. It was amazing. I don't think I've ever seen it before. And brilliant piece of work. The film itself, based on the play, it's one of the still probably the few movies where the full body of the text of Shakespeare, every word is in the movie that it captured. So great movie, great play, of course. Hamlet, one of the greats, and also Midsummer's Night Dream. I saw a rendition of it from a couple of years ago by the the only person I remember from that is the one of the Game of Thrones, is it Bree or something? So one of the actors was in the play as the Queen Fairy, something like that. So it was an amazing play too. So I got to experience all that. So that really is. I'm just happy when I get to have time to experience all these things. You know, to experience art and literature, and
Yes.
it all kind of feeds into each other. So I really, really enjoy that.
It's definitely interesting too with like the classics that you've been reading, because that informs a lot of the golden age of science fiction work. Because at that time, you know, people were brought up reading the British classics. That was the big deal, and the colonization side of Britain wasn't that old. You know, I mean, this is from like 1900 to 1950. You'd have people who are writing the golden age. And so, yeah, turn of the last century. My daughters always tease me about when I say turn of the century. They're like, Mom, it was 20 years ago. You know, but anyway. So I think like reading those kinds of things and enjoying those kinds of things today, it's also something that you're going to bring to the reading of again, classical science fiction side of things as well. The structures that are used in a lot of things. I maybe one of the reasons I don't read as many things as I should is because I analyze everything I read. So it's like being a critic all the way along. But it's
however, isn't it glorious, excuse me, when you're reading something and the editor shuts off because the writing is so good? You know, I found that with James Blish, because like you, I will read, and we were saying off camera earlier about the different levels of publishing. A lot of the lower levels of publishing, I can't read them because I go into autocorrect. It's like, what the heck? That paragraph could be like one sentence right there. But with James Blish, especially with Mission to the Heart Stars, that was shut off, and the only time it came on was when there were things which were so outstanding that I went, oh, wow, make a note of that one. That's an incredible thing, But again, that to me was a demonstration of the sheer power of how things were written back then. As you were saying, people drew on the classics, not just the British classics, the American classics, the French, the Russian classics. And as Blish made clear, most people who were reading back then knew the Greek classics. They knew Aeneid. He makes a reference to Swinburne. And you got to wonder how many people now would read Swinburne? What the hell's a Swinburne? And they just say, oh, that's some kind of science fiction name. No, he wrote a lot of stuff. No. One of the old English. Not old, but before us. I'll be quiet now.
No, I mean, we're kind of jumping in on this too, but I found it.
Yeah, let's jump in.
Yeah, to see that
next.
He lived in Britain when he wrote this. Like that can't remember when he had moved over there, but so that was even his thing. And if the version that we were looking at, it's written in either British or Canadian English.
Yeah.
Things are spelled favorite, O-U-R, not O-R. So,
Color, not color.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see because I definitely felt there was that bit of reserve to how he wrote, that classic structure, which I'm fine with, but on the other hand, I'm not. So it bothered me, Joseph, I think, to the extent that it made you enjoy it, which is fair. It's just a style of writing. It's not that something is good or bad necessarily on its face, but it's something that for me, I felt it was a little too stilted.
Really?
Well, yeah, and that's just because I deal right now with what is being published right now. And I deal with memoir a lot as well. And so what you want to do there is you want to jump into that person's life, jump right in. That's the style. It's the American style now, and it's very different. I think I jotted down that we use the phrase show versus tell as editors. And it's telling writers, show it, don't tell it. Don't have paragraphs of narrative that just tells it. Show it through action. Show it through your different characters. And so in here, in Missions to the Heart Stars, it's a lot of tell. You'll have paragraph after paragraph of description in the sense of telling it, not that they're taking action through it. And then you have lots and lots of paragraphs of dialogue. And so if you love dialogue and you're fine with the old style of it being told, and when I say old style, that just means it's not today. I don't mean that it's out of style necessarily. It's just not the style I'm dealing with right now. No, Joseph, please don't cry. You know me.
No, I actually, this is fascinating because I found his exposition via dialogue to be amazing.
Yes.
Because I agree with you, there's an awful lot of exposition. But the way he does it, the first thing to me was he got me interested in the characters. And you can tell immediately the audience he's working with because two of the principal characters are young cadets.
Yes.
And he specifies they're under 20 years old. They're basically 18 years old. So who is his audience? And the other main character, the Dr. Langer, he's Blish. He's Blish explaining everything.
Yeah. For sure.
To these people, to the readers. I didn't have a problem with that. I didn't find a challenge with that. His use of noctilucent, polyhedral. Where are you going to find words like that nowadays? It had a lot of sides. Oh, good job. It glowed at night. Oh, yeah, I'm with you there, buddy.
I'm trying to think. There was one word that I had never seen before in my life, and I had to look it up, and I can't remember what it was now, what it referred to. I think it might have been about a biology, something with one of the sciences. I'll have to look, but either that or a sociological concept. not hegemony, that one. But now I know how to say that.
Yeah.
After reading this.
Hegemoniacal.
Kind of to fill in some of the background, because I just want to, not too in depth, because he lived a long, well, not long, but he lived a very well-lived life. He's done a lot of stuff in his life. He is generally known, I guess, for Cities in Flight, which I don't think I've even heard of, but if you've read it, I mean, I haven't heard of it. That's the whole reason for this podcast, Joseph, which going to get me into this stuff and reading it. So also for towards the end of his life, he was doing Star Trek novelizations of the original episodes as it was airing. He was novelizing them, and with his wife, J. Lawrence, and he was credited with coming up with the term gas giants for large planetary bodies. And also, this is very interesting, is the Dirac communicator, which came out of the Quincux of Time novel in, I think, 54. A short story called Beep, but then republished, regurgitated later as this plot. And the plot is a device that gives you instantaneous communication across interstellar space, which we, in the latter histories, attribute that to the Ursula's Ansible concept, right? Which is most people, I think, at least in classic modern science fiction, like to harken trace that history back to her coming with the concept. But prior to her, this came out in a few years before that, even the direct communicator. So I thought that was super interesting. He was one of the originators, that idea of instant communication across anywhere. And his I don't even get into nitty gritty, but his big thing about one of the reasons he's writing, actually it's in the foreword, I guess, of the thing that we read, but he wanted to really get the young people of then that time frame, the 50s, to think about a lot of these socioeconomical, technological problems, how it's impacting people, and how to try to come together as a community to try to solve some of these problems. Because basically it's like he himself's not going to live to see whatever future is going to happen, the old people, as it were. It's the young people that's going to try to take up these solutions, because it's going to be within their lifetime, whatever's happening. And in getting back to the plot of the story, is that's the whole thing that Joseph was mentioning, is that he's framing this whole short story with this device of the elder and the younger, so that there's a passage of knowledge of like, this is going to be your world. And even at the very end of the story was telling about, it's a very broad generational story where even it goes fast forwards and, you know, hundreds if not thousands of years beyond the main character's story. It's like, from here on, the impacts of this is tremendous for all of humanity, for future generations. So,
also, again, going back to the conversation we were having off camera, the way he makes use of the problem with Aboriginal cultures without stating them as Aboriginal cultures, the dolphins, you know, and Tertiop's statement, I have experienced greater happiness. That brought tears to my eyes, you know.
Yeah.
But then the full circle of the novel at the end, and do recognize that as they're going from planet to planet to planet to get to the heart stars, they're going through levels of civilization, right? You know, and to the ultimate machine age where we have become slaves to the machine. Was that a bit of warning on his part? The ENIAC computer had only been out for 10 years at that point. But at the end of the story, the liberation of the Aboriginals. It's been a busy day here. My phone's ringing. I hope you don't mind.
Hey, you at least found time to read some other things, so
Yeah.
your phone could ring as much as possible. I didn't manage that, but you know, like thank you for grounding me. Seriously, thank you for making me sit in this chair for a little over an hour and talk about enjoyable things. Because, yeah, I would be the phone person as well. But
I actually enjoy when a piece of literature makes me struggle at trying to figure out what it's trying to say. I really enjoy that. For some, I think for I guess not you specifically, Robin, but just any readers in general, there are, and I remember this because when I was in school, a lot of my friends, when I gravitated towards a certain piece of work, people were like, "I hate that because it doesn't make any sense. I struggle at it. I don't understand it," and I feel like at some point people just give up. Whereas, to me, that makes it to me more fun. It funnels my sort of interest in it in towards the actual thing, to figure out what it is trying to say and figure it is interesting when there's itself. It's almost like a puzzle to unpack some of it, in terms of writing structure and all that stuff. So this is definitely one of those pieces where it's not always it's not something we're used to, but I think I have had to reread the passages several times to even try to get to point A to point B to point C and so forth. I did reread it a couple times, but I still don't. There's only still, I think, one thing I wasn't 100% certain. You guys might have ideas to illuminate that, but in the beginning, the entire sort of premise of getting these three people and spending all these millions of dollars. I laughed at that. I was like, millions of dollars. Okay, that would be like trillions, but to build a ship to carry them towards wherever the heart stars are. The only thing I could ascertain is that in the beginning they wanted to prove to the people managing the hegemony of the heart stars that they are a worthwhile race, the human race itself, right? And to be a part of the membership of this special sort of group, and to cut the membership sort of parole time, I guess, in half, right? Instead of 50,000 years to like 25,000 or sooner. I guess that's one of the goals that they want to do, but I wasn't sure how they were going to do it because it wasn't very clear in the story of. I didn't understand why, like, the three people on the ship and they're going there. What were they going to do to? I guess I didn't understand what they were trying to do when they get there, like to just convince them by just telling them, or just say, "We got here because we built this thing and it's amazing and we're like a show of force," or I couldn't quite kind of pin down what it was. That mission, as it were, to the Heart Star was, right? But at the end of the story, it was almost like the journey itself was the whole point, not the actual destination, right?
Yeah.
How zen.
Yeah.
I think it was as much of a mission that was being pushed forward as it was in a sense of being a mission that you're like drawn to something, and it was the political infighting. Right. Within, I'll say the United Nations. I think he does still call it the United Nations, although it's not really the body that we know now. But that there was some fighting. There was like basically two factions, and it was this idea of, yes, we want to belong to this hegemony of malice. I think it was Malus or Malice.
Impressive use of a name, huh?
Yeah. I have comments about other things too. Well, I'll say one right now. Hurtling through space. Yeah. They were hurtling through space.
Yes, the hurdle drive, yeah.
The hurdle drive, yeah. Yeah.
Traveling those distances, it's a big hurdle.
Yeah.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
I love that, though.
He played to the puns as well.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad, Joseph, that you saw it at a higher level than I did, because that was where my head was, that I was picking up on those kind of grumpy like little things, and I like puns though. My dad was always the punster in our.
But I wonder if that's because it's the periodical approach. Like you had to draw readers in as you were publishing it, right?
Yeah.
So there has to be something like, "Hey, look at me,"
Yeah. Well, not only that, I think he was. Sorry, Robin. I think he was also wanting to keep himself amused and his cadre of friends. Yeah. Did you see that when I put it in there?
Yeah.
Well, I looked up, actually, this is one thing I love about being able to read online as well, because it is so easy to do a search and to find out if it's a dead end or not that you're looking at. So I looked up physicists with that last name to see if there was a physicist, and there is an American physicist now who I think would be in his maybe 60s or 70s. So at the time he was a very young man, so I don't know if he was like nudging to that gentleman, or if it just so happened that, coincidence. But, I wasn't sure. I wanted to see if who Hurdle was, because I'm finding out like every name of anything usually in these stories relates to somebody, or something. Again, there's that little, because it very much seems like it's a club, of writers at the time, and I could definitely see that as well. But getting back to the plot side of things and like why they had this mission to go on, I found myself thinking that there were plot holes in the story in several places, but then they were answered within like a paragraph or two. So that's something that as an editor, I'd be like, excuse me, like do at least something a paragraph earlier so people know, so they're not just left hanging. And I'm wondering if that's our short attention span now. I think that's what it is. I think we have to write for the extremely short attention span. People can't carry over a thought from one paragraph to the next. And also, we're taught that paragraphs should be based around one thought. So to be fair, it's also the structure that we're given. But that's the editor in me. So yeah, I think that I was a little bit wondering, well, why do they need to do this? I had some questions as well. And there was a story that I guess was before this in the series.
The Star Dwellers.
And yeah. I have not read that. Yifong, have you written that, or have you read that one?
No, this is the first I'm reading of James Blish.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that a fair amount of questions that were in this would be...
We're newbies, Joseph, newbies. We don't know anything yet.
It's okay. It's okay, my son. I trust you, my son. No, I thought that the avowed purpose of going to the Heart Stars was to determine if, with the help of the angels, we could be a military threat and have some leverage with them.
Yeah, because the political underpinning.
Yeah, because that was stated that it violated the treaty with the angels. Now, getting back to pure exposition, when Blish had the conversations with the angels, just with the angels, Hesperus and Lucifer and the firstborn, I'm totally with you. It was like, what the... there's no smoother way to do this? My God. But I went, yeah, okay. You're talking about he should, there was a paragraph and then the explanation was in the next paragraph or two paragraphs down. A lot of times I find that the power of an author's writing, not a problem, because I trust them to answer the questions that I have later on.
Right.
Speaking as an author, one of my joys is a lot of the comments I get from my readers is they love the little things I put in, because they actually, I've had readers tell me they keep track to see when I bring it up again in the story further on, So, that to me is a good thing. I realize it may not be how everyone reads nowadays, but they should.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also true that you have to, as an author, you need to build trust. And one of the really cool things about reading these is that all these authors, the trust was already built. I mean, that's why we're reading them, because they've carried forward. So, let me just say that too. I'm so glad that I can take little pot shots because I don't feel like I'm destroying somebody's soul as a writer.
Yeah. Now that he's dead, can't defend himself. Yeah.
In this country, you're allowed to say anything. Somebody's passed, and you just don't even have to say anything true at all. But anyway.
I know we voted him out of office. Wait a second. No, he's gone. No.
But,
so the reason why I was I did catch all that, Joseph, but also it was complicated for me because this is it based on what the author wrote. He says this is the first time that they're even what was it? The first time they're even visiting Mars. They were doing a lot of firsts for humanity. The group of people between was it Jack and the trio of main characters.
Jerry. And
They were
Langer.
Yeah, this is their initial voyage, and to go from 0 to infinity, it was crazy because it was like they've never been here before, and they're just visiting this, Mars and Phobos for first time, and now they're gonna jump from here to like alien races and their cultures and planets into this other. And to me, it already felt like it was a not a foregone conclusion, but more just like a. It would have been an uphill to try to show a force for anything. It didn't make sense to me that they're trying to show a force for something that they didn't even know. You know.
They had already they've already done one interstellar voyage, not the team in the book, but in the book it states there's already been one interstellar voyage, and they've already explored most of the planets, including the moons, and there are bases here and there. Whatever it is that they have been doing in the story, it says they have been on Mars long enough to know the diagrams of power and their meaning.
Right. People lost their lives, right, to try to figure that out. Yeah.
So there's been, by the way, that diagrams of power and their meaning. Have you ever seen Gary Sinise's and Tim Robertson's movie Mars? It makes direct use of that.
Okay.
So,
no, I didn't pick up on that. I'd have to look back.
Yeah, I mean it's just wonderful how these things which are now tropes, where they originated and how they've been brought forward. It's also a phenomenal movie. I recommend it. But because they had understood what the diagrams of power were about, and it was their first time entering Phobos as a team. They had sent people in before. Most of them had died because of the unintentional booby traps. So they've been around for a while doing these explorations. Not thousands of years, no. I think the time scale that they were talking about was 25 to 50 at the most.
Right.
But because of the hurdle drive, they were now exploring further and further out. And Dr. Langer says, we would never make this attempt to go to the hard stars without the hurdle drive.
Right.
And I love the way he plants the seed for Hesperus helping them out. I don't want to give too much away by saying that these creatures essentially live inside stars. They are themselves stars, intelligent, active stars. I just found it, wonderful. So
this is by far the techiest story that we have read so far.
Oh yeah.
And I think because I had mentioned that the idea of me writing a science fiction short, I'd love to try it, but stories like this make it seem like I would never be able to do it. My science background kind of ends maybe first year of college. So
did you read his intro?
I did.
You think? Yeah. So he just got this idea by reading through an IEEE journal that somebody sent him.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, there's a cool idea.
But we had talked before, but he, it's where he's taken what he knows and then he puts it forward. And it's just interesting to see like that for me. I'm not going to put myself down 100 times because I know the difference in the story between interstellar and intergalactic. There's a huge difference now based on the science that we know we don't know as to what's possible. And, if I just double check, nothing that we're aware of yet has allowed us to do intergalactic travel in a human lifetime. So that was something that, the hurdle drive took care of that. And then there's a point where they're in the wave. When they talk about sine, and I'm like, oh, cosine, sine, just certain things I was able to follow very much the science in here, but it was science heavy, tech heavy, that's what I'll say. Yeah.
Well, the hurdle drive was warp drive before there was Star Trek.
Yeah, definitely. I think those things all play together.
Oh yeah.
And I think this actually, in a lot of ways, it really aged well. It still reads in a way that, it has meaning today. But I got to share the one part that I laughed out loud. Like, I couldn't help it. I dated an engineer a lot in college. So this is why when they had this issue and they whipped out their slide rule.
Yeah.
Rule, I was on the floor under that. Sorry.
That cracked me up. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad to see, like, alone, like laughing, But yeah, so there's a few places like that where it hasn't really, but for something that's based just on tech, not based on, but it's so important to it, and it's something that's what, 60 years old now. That's amazing that
Hmm.
it's still very readable and that we're still grappling with some of the same issues, but they feel like they're not so far out of range. They feel like they are something that there's a way to get around it. We just haven't figured out the practical side of it yet.
Hmm.
So, I like that very much. Um, I was surprised that it was so much into, again, the sociological side of things. And I realized reading as I got into it that it made me feel very much like Gulliver's Travels,
Mm.
which again, Swift is a British classical
Mm-hmm.
writer.
Hmm.
And, I think that Blish could certainly, to be surrounded by that, where he was living and all. And I'm making jumps here with, what he would be doing. But I just, I picked up on that. And then also, I loved Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia, when I was a child. My older brother introduced me to him, and I just love that. And this is very much like the Voyage of the Dawn Treader,
Mm.
where,
Yes.
they go, and then there's even star people and all that too.
Yep.
I don't think that's stealing ideas. I think it's borrowing, putting it together, and coming out with something new and fresh. So,
Hmm.
I mean, again, not a read on Mr. Blish, but yeah, he's somebody I think that I respect his brain right now. Maybe not so much the way he tells the story, but I think that was just baked into the time.
Yes.
And
Yes.
as you said too, it's like baked into whatever way you get your bills paid, because you can be super smart and super talented, but you still have to get those bills paid, and you have to like bend a bit to the publisher. So
Yeah. It's amusing to me you mentioned the Voyage of the Dawn Treader because I agree with you. As I was reading it again, for I forget how many times I've read it, I went, "Oh yeah, this is the Voyage of the Beagle."
oh
Uh,
yeah, HMS Beagle, sure.
yeah, and there's a uh, play on words that goes from James Blish's Mission of the Heart Stars to A.E. Van Vogt's The Voyage of the Space Beagle, and they visit similar planets, which cracked me up. It's kind of like because they were friends, they
Hmm.
lived, same time period in same area. Can I borrow that planet? Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Can I
Yeah,
take two of those? Yeah, sure. This one pretty cool. As you were saying earlier about they all got together at some point and talked. Talked shop. They didn't have Zoom. They actually had the benefit to me of sitting around a table of cafe somewhere, and sipping a drink.
that's how I'm envisioning it too. And
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that's exactly the way, but it's the context I like to have in my head when I'm
yeah,
reading these things. And I found before I start really reading, I'll take a quick look at it, but then I look very much into the author's life
hmm,
even before I start, because it gives me that context of what they were feeling about when they wrote it, what kind of world were they in,
hmm,
and then it makes it just richer for where we are today. I also just wanted to say one thing too. I do like the opening of this, the way that it was written. It was something that wasn't written exactly the way that most people would write today, but it certainly was an action. He got the setting done. He showed it. He didn't tell it. And,
hmm,
and I knew where he was. I know, like,
yeah,
okay, he's on the ship. He explained it. Oh, that's so cool. And I had in my head, Mars looked huge. I mean, just the scale of it and how it was passing by, all those things that, were very visual now, but he put it into writing and he did it very well right at the beginning.
yeah,
He grabbed my attention and I was seeing a somewhat complicated, view in my head
yep,
of what was going on. So, and I like that idea too. I thought that was neat that like Phobos was something that the hegemony of malice had used, because doesn't that play into our fears? And how you
oh yeah,
mentioned too, like and on the dark side of the moon, there was like something that, yeah, it's on the dark side of the moon. It's like, yeah, what is around that corner there? What is it we don't see? But and I think, like, if you look at too, like, space exploration for humanity right now, it basically means the moon. I mean, that's
hmm,
the only body that we've stepped on as a race. Um, but there's almost that little bit of perverse, like, there wasn't a moon monster. There wasn't like something like very unexpected. So I'm chuckling because I talk about moon monsters.
All
Pass
of
one over here.
the space Maki.
Yes. We're Yvonne, we're gonna have to make
Cheers.
some too. We're gonna have to make
Cheers.
some of those. So one night we'll have that. I love it. I love it. Sir, you are living the life today. I mean, that you have to understand from our side too what it looked like. All of a sudden, this glorious mug of frothy liquid, just appears, like floats over to you.
Yes. If only she could have a tentacle instead of a hand.
Oh my
thanks,
goodness.
Babe. Yeah. Thanks, babe.
Halloween.
Yes, Joseph's living the life. We're not sure where, but he's living the life.
Living the life. But it's interesting. Again, I get going on these things, but it is interesting to hear what you both think about it. Like for you, Yifang, when you were reading the beginning, I know like you were thinking about the plot of like, well, why are they going to a certain place? Because that's what came up. But was there something that jumped out at you in a good way at the beginning of the story? Because openings are so important.
Yeah, I mean the whole the way he describes how the technology worked inside of Phobos, of how to navigate, how to go through it, how to get into how to jump into that hole, and how is it biological sentient? Somehow it detects whether
right, and it like sucks you down.
And then there's an experiment with the cat, right, and stuff like that. I found all of that incredibly fascinating, and one thing I wanted to add just a little bit from that forward, but also just his life that actually would add some value to the discussion, is that he wrote a lot of criticism of science fiction in general, like a critic. And as a critic, he would often throw down, I guess, with a lot of authors who were more fantastic and weren't actually science-based. So, like, he would always be like, where is your science in your science fiction? Like, he would stress on that. And so he would get into fights with all these other authors about that. And I think it informs his writing, as you can clearly see in this, like you were saying, is very techie for a reason. I think he does, although it is fiction, he does want to bring an element of reality into the writing so that you can believe that they're in space, they're trying to get into this thing that's incredibly complex. It's still based on real life, real world physics and ideas and technology and concepts, and also socioeconomic, philosophical cultures.
Yes.
It's tied to something real as opposed to completely fantastic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you really want to see him do a tour de force of science in his fiction, you have to read The Cities in Flight. He has basically a spacefaring planet that's broken free of its sun, but the civilization on the planet knew it was going to happen. So they said, hey, screw it, we'll take the entire planet and make it into a spaceship. And the drive mechanisms, how they retain the atmosphere, it's impressive.
Talking about that too, it kind of shows that he likes to play with scale.
Oh, yeah.
Take things, make them bigger, make them, what happens if. And I think that idea of I believe that there's a lot of repetition. It's just scaling things up or scaling them down. I mean, that's mathematical as well. I do think that mathematics is the language of God, the universe, whatever phrase that you want to use. That's my own feeling on it. But I believe there are others who think that way as well. So
his use of scale, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
that's all right.
James Blish also wrote Surface Tension. And if you have not read that, we should do that as one of our things in the future. Surface tension deals with bioengineering to the extreme. I mean, it's when you realize what the story is about, you're like, oh my God. But
well, it's just interesting too, because now I'm thinking of I liked Michael Crichton's work from the 70s, where he was, again, it was more scientific necessarily, but I loved that work, and it really played well as movies, and very popular movies. But his books, especially the first ones, they're definitely science.
Yeah.
Based.
Andromeda Strain, yeah.
Oh yeah, well that one.
Yeah.
I did see that movie when I was very, very young, and I was like on the edge of my seat. Just the tension in that was very good. And then I think I visited his writing maybe a little bit after that, and also because he wrote Jurassic Park, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Thank you. Okay.
And Terminal Man.
Yeah.
Which was
Yep.
amazing.
There's just so many that And if you think of like what Blish has done in that, where he's taking science that existed, that the scientists yes, this works and our understanding, and then he would extrapolate it a few steps further, and then wherever it would dead end and he's wanted the story to go further, that's where he would come in with his well, this physicist who I know is a friend, that's what he's going to figure out, type of thing. I wonder, gentlemen, if this is the kind of thing that he actually maybe upset some friends, so to make up to them in the future, he made them like, the recipients of creating some wonderful, necessary tech in the future in the story. I don't know. See, I love characterization, as you can tell characters. So here I am, fantasizing about, is this what his character really was? But that's me. I can't help it. I own it. That would be a whole discussion too for days and days. How much character development is necessary to make a science fiction story work. And I think you're opening my eyes a little bit more to James Blish, because I'm realizing now, wait a minute, in that opening scene, the doctor is playing cards like with the 18 or 19-year-old back in the, off the deck area, the one little area that they could possibly do that. You wouldn't necessarily think that's who he is as the story goes forward, because he's required to have these, he has to really be effusive with his understanding of science and explaining it through dialogue. So that kind of dryness in his character was offset at the very beginning by being a playmate almost with one of the youngsters who he's working with. So that's a cool character thing. That's a show. That's not telling. So,
well, the playful interlocutor, if you will, who gives the knowledge, but does it Socratically. Yes. Because all through the novel, the novella, they will say something. The two cadets will say, and I was waiting for you to figure that one out. I was waiting for you to do that. And as far as characterization goes, one of the, not Jack, I believe it's the other cadet.
Jerry, I think is Sandbags. Jerry.
Sandbag, yeah. Which you got to admit, he's the guy who wants to stand back. Wait a second, so we're going to call him Sandbag, okay? But also the double entendre. Sandbagging is what we do to protect ourselves. We bring the sandbags up. He, and it's even stated he's like 18 years old. He is writing down, to fill his time, he's writing down the Aeneid from memory.
I
know. I have 3 versions of the Aeneid. I couldn't do it reading them. I couldn't write it down. So that tells you a lot about who he thinks he's writing for.
Right.
The people back then had classical training.
And it was before we had the web, and so you think about somebody being in Europe but selling his works over in America still, being like a worldwide author of science fiction. How do you connect? You connect by having people come over, like by taking a week to take, to get around, to travel around, to write letters. People used to write letters.
I know. That was an art form.
And they used to have journals, like tons and tons and tons of journals, not online, but as an editor, I weep for those days because I would have had a lot of work back in that era. But anyway, so much more. I don't need any more work. Let me put it that way. I'm fine right now. But it's almost like saying these stories had to be the web of the time too. It was a way to put out into the world where science was, where it was in society. I think that's a real change with science fiction back then, that was the bridge between scientists and average people, really, in a lot of ways. And I also know, like, I mentioned that I have older brothers, so they were into classic science fiction. They were definitely into it. And this was an era, this was a little bit more, and I remember using the phrase completely wrong with this, and if I am, correct me. But I think of this almost like space opera, but it wasn't, because we get into the, the sociological side of things and all, but it definitely had that 1950s kind of, even Buster Crabbe 1930s kind of feel to it as well.
Yeah.
And I think that would appeal to somebody who was 18 to 20 years old, or 15 to 20 years old back when he wrote it.
Yes.
If you back it up a little bit, that's the stuff they would have been seeing when they were little kids going to the movie theater.
Yeah.
And there was Buster Crabbe and
Flash Gordon.
Yes, Flash Gordon. Buster
I've seen
Crabbe
it all.
The actor. I'm just going to say a side here. First time I think that totally freaked out was when was the female Dale in it? I think she was like in a cave, and the cave wall moved, and it was like this mud guy, and he just like grabs her and pulls her into the wall. Total practical effects, 1930 something, and it still works. Black and white, the whole thing. But anyway, I think that this really was written for that age group, but it plays on a lot of different levels as well. As well.
There was a little, speaking of the times, as it were, the context of the story. There was a little line about like three-dimensional movies. I don't know how many of you guys know about movies, but also 3D movies in general. 1953 and 54 were the heights of the 3D film. Now, 3D movies have been around since, believe it or not, the late 1800s. Experiments.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Not like they haven't made features, but they had always experimented with it. Those.
That's true, but stereopticons.
Yeah, I forgot what the thing is, the still photography where you look through the.
Yeah, those I think were stereopticons.
I forgot what they're called, but they've had those devices since the late 1800s, so it's not new even then. But they've evolved that into motion pictures, and in fact, artists like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, they were actually experimenting with it. They didn't actually make any movies with it. In the really famous era of like Douglas Fairbanks, all of the big giants of cinema have dabbled and played with the format, but it became too impractical to deliver it, because there wasn't a good playback system to do that until probably the 50s, when they actually introduced it, and then they rolled it out wide. Now, these 3D systems weren't like the red and blue that people think of. That's actually
That's what I would think of.
Well, that's from the 80s, when somebody started a reviewer one day started to make fun of it. And since then, the current generation of people think about 3D, think about that. Like the old 3D has always been that. It is not true. That's only post the 80s and 90s. That's the anaglyph technology. But in the 50s, when they rolled it out, it was it's the same exact polarized 3D that we have today, actually, the really good high quality ones like Avatar and so forth. So they've had that in the 50s, 52, 53. And there was about a couple hundred, if not more, titles of Hollywood features made in It Came from Outer Space was popular in 3D. And I have that. Now, if you watch that in 2D, it's just as cheesy, and same with 3D. But if you watch it in 3D, it was like made for 3D. It was like it was made for that time. So when this author referenced that, I myself got a kick because I know the history behind it. If you don't, it's kind of a But anyways, jumping off of that is what'd you guys think of the whole dolphin concept, about communicating with dolphins, the species, and kind of what they represent? And they were even talking about bringing that species to populate that one of the worlds that was an ocean world with, I guess, creatures that weren't really sentient or something. I couldn't quite remember.
The squid creatures were sentient, but the mammals were not.
Okay. So the concept is to bring the dolphins to enlighten the world, or
I wasn't 100% sure on that one either. I'll be fair. And that one didn't. It was like something that they could do if something went wrong, but I never fully understood.
The only thing I could think of was, so long, thanks for all the fish, and then the dolphins land. That's the only good thing of what I was thinking of the dolphins.
But you have to remember that they knew the dolphins would be against it.
Okay.
You do remember the dolphins would not go for it because essentially they were saying, and I hate to put it this way, but the big white guys were saying, oh, we'll colonize the planet by letting the creatures we've essentially colonized colonize for us. And they knew, and that's again where they cycle back, and Jerry remembered at that point what Tersiops the dolphin had said, I have known greater happiness. No, we can't do, and he says, no, we can't do that. We can bring some of them there to talk with them, but not to colonize them, which was radically different. And I thought it was wonderful.
You know, it's interesting though, because that's fair to say. A lot of this, it's like three characters, and they're having, you know, arguments in a sense. It's like, you know, debate. The very kind of classic debate where you set up, and more of that was happening near the end of the story, because by that point we again know the characters better. We know who they are, we know some of their backgrounds, we know why they could debate. And I bet you any little thing in here that I think was left out of the plot for some reason, I just missed it. Maybe because again I'm reading it how many decades after it was written, or my basis of understanding isn't the same. But I think Blish was very careful with how he crafted the story.
Yes. The three-character debate was repeated almost identically in a movie called Mind Walk. Again, a phenomenal movie. It's basically three individuals getting together for lunch in France, at a castle in France, a resort castle, and discussing much the same topics in much the same way. What is the right of colonization? What are the rights of warfare? How do we bring ourselves to do these things? What if there is life elsewhere? So, you know, I again, Mind Walk is a phenomenal. I feel so old sometimes.
You always say things like that. You crack me up, though. You know?
Put my teeth back in and get out of here, you know.
I think I can't remember but it was something when we were talking about Marie Leinster, and you know, I just remember I had laughing, thinking, Joseph, you're not 100 years old. You know, it was something like, not, you know, it's like, no, you know, he was writing when it was like the 20s and stuff. So you can read him and not be 100 years old at all. With this. Well, you guys are getting, you know, you're winning me over to Blish. I don't think that he's the kind of writer that I would necessarily be drawn to, but I'm certainly getting a good respect for him. Although the pun thing, I've got to look at some notes. We had hurtling through space. Let's see if there was another one that I can remember. Oh, this isn't a pun, but it's the first time that I've ever seen the word spangling used outside of our national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. He actually wrote the spangling of stars. So that was one of those things that's definitely not something that we would say today. You know, it's definitely an older kind of thing. And I just think that's because now, again, we're 50 or 60 years past that. It's just not something we're going to use again. I know there's at least one or two other puns, though. Do you remember any of them? I thought I had. Oh, this isn't a pun either, but again, here's a quote from it. From Dr. Langer, was it? He said Langer or Langen. Quote, the human diet absolutely requires certain minimum amounts of high quality animal protein, whether synthetic or natural. And then I jot down here, like Impossible Burger or Beyond Meat. I had just seen like a commercial, a very expensive kind of commercial aired at a time that it would be very expensive to broadcast that commercial for one of these products, and like it looks like meat. So it was just so funny to read that. And again, grasping with those same ideas, you know, and it's so interesting to see where we are again several decades later, because it's not that long since this was written, but at the same time it feels like forever. All right, so I think that were the only kind of like funny things that jumped out at me from it. That anachronistic. There we go. I was trying to think of that. All I could think of was anarchy, and that wasn't right. But something being out of time a little bit.
Those type of ideas were probably already. It would have been on the visibility of a lot of, especially sci-fi authors who would have read into the popular things that were happening in science at that
Absolutely.
moment. And so it probably wasn't a stretch for a lot of science fiction authors to kind of reference those various different things. Things like nuclear power advancements. Many sci-fi authors would just say it's basically assumed that that's how humanity would move forward. Like I don't think any of them, yeah, if they lived to see this, they would have been shocked by like how we were like a lot of people are against that and developing and cutting off funding for it. They probably would have been like, "What are people thinking?"
Oh,
Still,
yeah.
on
Yep.
the coal and other things.
Yeah.
And things like this, food grown in labs and materials, especially for space flight. If you need to travel, you have to figure out a way to recycle things, and so I think a lot of these concepts would have been kind of known in the when they were writing things to reference. So they're kind of
Yep.
like part of their tool sets to reference as they were writing.
If anything, I would imagine they probably think we would have solved some of these things already. That we'd be a little bit further beyond. Certainly, I think in within our own star system, planetary visitation, I can remember again being a little kid and thinking, oh, now what's the next planet out? We're going to go there. Like, this very linear thinking, but when you're a little kid, sometimes that's how it is. So even though we have a lot of unmanned, wonderful unmanned trips in our galaxy, we haven't done the manned thing until recently, where it's getting back going again for Mars. But I think those jumping off points moving forward, and I'm backtracking a little bit, but we were talking about like a 3D kind of movie that he mentions, or a 3D TV. For me, the thing that would equate to that I'm equally like flabbergasted that we have it, is 3D printing, where you
Oh yeah,
can print organically, you can print, so many different
it's
things.
like the food replicator, basically.
That's,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And you can just do so much with it. To me, that's amazing. But that's something that I just didn't pick up, that we would have that, and that it would be something that would be potentially even more available and not too expensive to do. So that's something that's very interesting. And I think when you read something like this too, I know for me, it makes me want to think about, well, what tech don't we have? What tech might we have? How did you both feel about how I'll just say the star creatures, the angels, how they fit in with the story? Because I
The
did have
giants, you mean? Like the
The-
8-9 feet tall.
No,
thing that
those are
floats
the
around?
Milesians, the star dwellers,
yeah, I'm
The
thinking
star
the
dwellers,
angels.
the angels.
Oh,
Right?
the angels.
The
Okay.
angels, yeah. Angels. I shouldn't have mixed those two things up. And again, it may be because I didn't read the first story, but it just seemed there was the use of them in the plot line. Well, there's that phrase, pardon my Latin, Deus ex machina.
Yeah.
God from machine. And I
Yeah,
just,
ducks in the machine. Yeah.
yeah, I know.
Ducks in the machine. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was at play. So that kind of was like, see, when I put a lot of things together, I guess I was just in that mood of with this story. But like I said, you're bringing me around on it, definitely.
Well, the angels, again, that you talk about puns. They were the god beings. They were created before the universe began. They have the ability to destroy an entire galaxy without, what are you going to do today? Screw up that galaxy. There we go.
Right.
Next, and they are the only ones that the oldest civilization in the galaxy fear. Right? So they are the gods. And I found it hysterical that the discussion which appears was the firstborn. That's what the angels were. They were the firstborn of God. And the actual discussion was between Hesperus, fire, and Lucifer, the morning star.
Mhm.
which was, in ancient Hebraic traditions, that was the conflict. It wasn't the Archangel Michael and Lucifer, it was the morning star and the fire, the sun.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and to me, there was so much embedded in the story. And again, as I said so many times, they were drawing off of so much of classical literature
Hmm.
from all the takes, not just British classical, but the use of the Greek myths and stuff. I found that breathtaking, um, and the way he was able to span the ancient classical literature with modern technology. Phobos is the moon, which essentially goes around Mars, but it's at an orbit that's basically New York to San Francisco. That's not that far.
No.
So it's moving really quickly. Phobos, and he even says the two horses of Mars's chariot, Deimos and Phobos was fear. Something whipping around a planet that quick, we're going to land on that? Yeah, I'm getting a little scary. Yeah, give me the other one, Give me the big one. It's a good-sized target way out in space. Um, the another thing that I thought was amazing in the story was not only was each planet that they visited at a different cultural level, sociological level, each planet was a different take on slaves.
Hmm. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
the cephalopods basically turned the archetype, not archetype, the archaeon creatures, the multicellular species, the algae, into their slaves to create their cities. And then I forget the other planet's name, but we've decided we're going to keep you as pets. You have become our slaves. Wow. I just,
When you mentioned that too, I think he mentioned that that planet's name has like a Swahili kind of
yeah,
take to it, like a click.
yeah, yes,
And
yes,
so I'm just realizing that now how that plays into the slavery side of things too.
yes,
It's
yes,
being self-aware that white British male now, because again, that's where he chose to live at the end of his life. He was owning it a bit, I think, but just a
hmm
little tiny bit. And again, that's what my take is because of the era it was.
yeah,
It was just people did not go out in the streets and talk as much about things, not at all as we do now. I mean, this I can again remember from being a little child, and you were seen, not heard. I mean,
yeah.
that was still a big thing. So
I think people talked about them, but it was on PBS. And, the stations only had like a 40-watt tower, so they
yeah.
basically got a signal down the street.
But again, I didn't pick up on that. I did, though. This is complete left turn from this. Was I couldn't help it when he was talking about it's the cephalopods, I believe,
Mm.
on the water planet. I couldn't help but think of Squidward from SpongeBob SquarePants because it was like, yes, he plays an oboe. He's absolutely,
Yeah.
the top of the line. And I don't think there are dolphins per se on SpongeBob, but Squidward certainly is there. So
hmm
it's just this nice little melange of like popular culture and things that make you think a lot. And
Yes.
I gotta say, again, the way it's set up, the trope of it, that put me off a bit. There's a lot more here
Mhm.
than I really expected, except for those dollar amounts too. Because if I was the same way, it's like, oh, it's
Well, I have that right here in my pocket. Yeah.
well.
Was there anything else you want to kind of last words on it? I think stories like this are so densely packed,
Yeah.
like we talked about before, that we could go on. But I think we could probably put some last words on it.
I actually have one more kind of bigger idea.
Sure, go ahead.
out
Yeah,
there.
absolutely.
So at the end of it, I really saw this story as a Cold War treatise against the then Soviet Union aimed at our military young men. And so it was a time of, the Iron Curtain. And this is very much, there were a few speeches near the end there that explained how, again, the idea of the story, no, you can't be slaves. That's not what the world wants. That's not what the galaxy wants. That's not what the universe wants. It wants us. It wants us to go out there and, have that kind of free thinking way. They never say democracy per se, but yeah, it was very much us versus them, and them, and our country had won World War II, and democracy was trying to get pushed throughout the world. And so I'm not saying that he wrote this as propaganda, but it can certainly be seen as propaganda. And me saying that, I'm kind of getting like cringy saying it, but or it could just be a story of its time, played out to the audience at the time. But it's that colonization, and we're right. Our idea of it's right, and this one, no, the other way is wrong. You don't.
Mom, apple pie, and the girl you left
Yeah,
behind.
versus societies where they're just slaves to machines, and that's what we were taught about the Soviet Union. That's absolutely it's slaves to machines that don't turn out anything good, just broken goods that don't work and aren't needed. That had to be partially propaganda, looking back on it.
No.
As someone who is like just steeped in it, my era.
No.
So yeah, that's a big topic.
Yes.
A huge topic. Do you guys think I'm wrong in saying that, or do you think?
Oh no, I think it was totally in there. I mean,
absolutely, it's an element of it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
As Yiping was saying at the beginning, this was went through several iterations from 56 to 65.
I think it was, yeah.
So the Russians had gotten the first satellite into orbit.
Yeah. They had the bomb by now.
Yeah,
they had to have it for a long time, and Vietnam was heating up.
Yeah.
At that time too, so again, it's one of those things that I didn't pick up on it until the very end, but it was the first thing that jumped out at me.
Yep.
I have to say, if anybody has to write like a criticism or a college paper about a short story novella, this would be a good one to use, because there's so many things that you could write it, no matter what your background really was, no matter what degree you're going for.
Yeah.
Certainly that way. So yeah, spangling though. You use the word spangling. The editor in me kind of likes that though.
Swing for the fences, right?
Yep.
All right. Any last thoughts before we close this out?
We are reading him again, I believe, in a few months. I think we're going to be talking about the James Blish story again. I'll have to
maybe to be determined.
Yeah, I'll have to see.
We can talk about that later.
Yeah. But I'd be looking forward to that. In other words, I'd be bringing this discussion forward to that story. So, as being somebody who was kind of on the outside of this, the outskirts of it, not necessarily liking it, I've been won over.
He's another, I don't know if there are many like him, but he often would take the feedback from other readers who would write letters to him or other people. He'd take that criticism and the things that he thinks he would actually revise it.
Yeah.
So there's no monolithic version of his stories. I don't know about this particular one, but I know that a lot of his stories have gone through multiple iterations. Yeah. It would never end the revision. So you could have, 5 to 10 drafts of a single story in a version we're reading of this one, depending on what year it is.
That's so interesting though, because that is something that occurs now that didn't with ebooks.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, if you are publishing an ebook, you can go in and update it. It's super easy. It doesn't cost anything except a few minutes of a person's time to do it. You don't have to print up new editions and all. So that's so interesting that he did that at a time where, and that's just par for the course now if you're doing ebooks. Interesting.
All right. So we could probably go on, but I think that's, we can put a button on it for today. And thank you, Joseph. Thanks, Robin, for going along the ride, as it were, the mission. It feels very like a big mission, it's not so much a mission, it's more like a journey, I think, for this particular story. And certainly as readers, you're kind of taking along for the ride to wherever the story takes you. And I really enjoy that when you have stories that can invite audiences to get swept up in whatever it is that they're trying to tell within the story. In that world, as long as that internal logic makes sense, I love stories like that. So certainly one of them. Okay, so let's see. We can find more of your work, Robin, at
robinbaskerville.com, and I'm on Twitter as well. So easy to find.
Perfect. And for you, Joseph, we can find more of your work at
josephcarabas.com. I'm so inventive.
It's the way to go.
And for me, you can find more of our stuff at, I've yet to post this, but hopefully by the time this is out, it's going to be up soon. Classic Science Fiction Literature Podcast. Just search for it in your popular podcast app. And also, wouldn't mind if you guys refer us out to people who like, reading in general, but also science fiction, and search for it in your favorite podcast app. And if you wouldn't mind leaving a star rating or reviews, that would also greatly help us. And if you just Google us, I think at some point you'll find a site linking to all of our materials and resources. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, Robin. And thanks all our listeners to be. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.